All right, we are broadcasting. There we go. Well, as people get allowed in, are you drinking a beverage of any kind at this happy hour?
I am drinking a grapefruit spindrift, which is the best of all spindrifts.
I wish I could buy Spindrift stock because every single startup office I've ever been in has a whole tank of Spindrift.
Yeah, I was about to say, I live in San Francisco and I'm drinking spindrift. Am I a cliche yet? It's a little embarrassing. I just like grapefruit, so it's delicious. How about yourself, Sean? What are you drinking?
I'm just a normie red-blooded American here with my Coca-Cola.
Okay, we're just representing different sections of this country. Someone else is a spindrift too. So grapefruit is where it's at. I love that people are so animated about this. I love spindrift. Grapefruit and lemon, but grapefruit for sure. So
someone recently offered me a case of pineapple spindrift. I had to politely decline, but there's a surplus out there. It is. Okay. For everyone watching, Claire here has a list of icebreakers on Know Your Team. And I'm going to ask her one, which is, what was the first thing you bought with your own money?
Ooh. So it's funny.
This is your question. I'm pulling your material here.
I rarely go back and try to answer my own questions, which I don't know what that says about me. God, what is the first thing I bought with my own money? It must not have been that important because nothing is immediately coming to mind, but I will tell you a very significant purchase that I made with my own money that at the time felt good, but I don't know if it was the first one, which is, I remember it was the first CD that I bought, and brace yourselves, everyone. It was a Britney Spears Hit Me Baby One More Time CD, like the one with it's really hard to say this with a straight face, like the one where it's like a pink background and she's like sitting on the ground.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I just thought I was so scandalous for doing that. It's like, oh, my parents know about this. Like, oh, this is so racy. This is so, I don't know. I felt very adult in making that purchase. Probably gives a little bit of my age away too to folks in the audience. But that's the first thing that comes to mind.
That is wonderful.
What is it wonderful, Sean? I don't know.
No, it is.
Was the first purchase you made with your own money?
I immediately went out and bought the cheapest drum set I could afford, and it was really bad. And I put it in my house, and I was really bad at the drums. And my mom made me sell it immediately. And then I learned something about investing. But anyway, okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crossbeam Happy Hour, which is where we offer conference-worthy career advice, interviews, and talks for the price of free $99. My name is Sean Blanda. I am joined here by Claire Lew, CEO of Know Your Team. Know Your Team is software that helps managers become better leaders. You can use her tool to hold effective one-on-one meetings, get honest feedback, share progress, build team rapport, especially useful as we are all not in the same office, and that's what we are talking about today. Claire, anything you want to tell the people about Know Your Team?
Yeah, I mean, you covered the basics of it. I think for folks who right now are, working remotely, whether it's the first time or something where you just feel like now more than ever, you're trying to figure out how do I have actual sort of water cooler chat with folks. I feel like I'm zoomed out, just on Zoom meetings all the time, but at the same time want to feel connected. So how do you do that in an actual genuine and unintrusive way? And so we help you with that with our social questions, our icebreakers. But really the whole premise of Know Your Team was founded because I personally have felt like it is really hard to be a really good leader. And so I've spent the past almost 10 years researching, writing, speaking on the topic. And the product, Know Your Team, is essentially what we came up with based off all that research. So we just boiled all of the methodology that we developed into the tool. But the social connection piece is one big part of it for sure.
And you are a remote team, correct?
And we are a remote team, exactly. And so we've been doing this for a while. But I mean, here's the thing: we're all remote right now, and yet it's a different kind of remote, because we also, for example, I live, I'm in California right now, and I can't leave my house, so to speak, right? Like I'm on lockdown still. And so it's a different kind of remote than I think what a lot of us have experienced in the past. The environment's just completely different.
And for context, before this, I had 2 jobs. Work for Envision, which is one of the largest distributed software companies. So I have some war stories as well as Claire does, and we'll touch on that. So scheduled
Definitely.
Today, 4 questions for Claire, a little bit of time for Q&A. So the entire time during this interview, this happy hour, drop any questions you have in the chat. I'll surface some good ones to Claire, and then we'll get out of here. So before we get into the questions, we're going to talk a little bit about being socially connected to your coworkers while you're remote. I would love to know, drop it in the chat, ways that your team has managed to stay connected while being remote. So as an example, the thing the Crossbeam team did is a wine tasting where we mailed everyone wine. We hired someone to walk us through it, and got to riff on wine and collaborate and hang out via Zoom. So what your equivalent of that, drop it in the chat, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming question. But first, let's start big picture here. For those who haven't worked remote yet, or this is their first time working remote, it's obviously different. There's some obvious tips you can read on the web about like little brass tacks tips here. But I'll start with mindset shifts. What is the ways you have to reorient your thinking because we're remote now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first consideration that a lot of people actually forget is actually understanding that the transition to remote work takes a little bit of time. So it's not like you flip a switch or you all of a sudden take all of your in-person meetings you used to have and move them onto Zoom and then turn on Slack and now you are remote, right? It's not, I mean, for some of us who've done that, you've probably felt the growing pains of being like, oh yeah, that's not really how you do remote. And so the question then is, okay, well then what is? And there are some really big, mindset changes for sure, Sean. One of them is this idea that you're not just transferring everything that you used to just say to folks in the hallway, whether that's good morning or strategy meetings, etc., to Zoom, but what you're actually having to think about is how do I actually think about writing more, especially as a leader. So written communication and asynchronously, what that does is you essentially first give yourself a little bit of time to think something through, and then you can actually put almost like a URL to what you're saying, right? So now all of a sudden you've written something up that your entire team can look at it.
There's a record.
Exactly, right? And it's almost this, canonical piece that you can always come back to. And that's, instead of sort of receiving a barrage of pings, of DMs, of being back to back on Zoom, you can actually thoughtfully put together write-ups on, oh, here's how we would actually kick off a project. And the person can then digest that on their own time. You save a bunch of stress trying to go back and forth or holding sometimes this happens, I think, to some folks, is where they're like, okay, we have to kick off this project, so I'm going to hold a meeting in Zoom. And then you have the meeting in Zoom and you're like, wait, we need to tell now this other person about the project that we're kicking off. So then you hold this other meeting, right? And then it's like, wait, but actually you weren't the right person. We need to hold someone. And it's just like, well, that could have probably been solved a lot with asynchronous writing. So that's one piece for sure. The other really big piece that I would say is the biggest mindset shift is actually around social connection, right? Mm-hmm. So when we are in person, it's so much easier to go grab lunch with someone, have coffee with them, and feel connected and understand, hey, this is what they're doing over the weekend. This is, what they're doing after work. And what we have to realize, especially as leaders, is when we work remotely, we have to be so much more intentional about that social connection piece. And so I can take some more time and maybe some future questions during the Q&A after to talk more about what that exactly looks like. But that's a big shift, is that social connection and rapport isn't just a thing that happens, but it's something you have to be extremely intentional about in a remote environment more than anything.
Yeah, it's a thing that you know intellectually, but you don't know until you go through it. Is there's no osmosis, right? Like you're not in the
Yep.
office and you see this team kind of stressed out over here, and you're like, oh, they're shipping something. Like, okay, you have no context for how they're feeling on a given day. So
Oh, totally.
you, unless you're, it's what you said, it's about intention, right? Like if you're not intentional about something, you're not gonna know. And if
Absolutely.
you're not
Well,
intentional communicating it, they're not gonna know.
yeah, and what you talked about, Sean, about osmosis, I mean, it's, there's so much research that's gone on about how the communication that we do, I think it's what, 55 to 60% is, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
more, is actually non-verbal. And if we're chatting in Slack or Basecamp or Asana or whatever it is, we lose that. And so you don't get the majority of the communication you were usually. It actually has some pros to it in some way, in that you can be focused on certain things, but you lose that fidelity. So that's for sure. I mean, another unintended consequence is Buffer did this big state of remote work piece and survey, and the one that they did in 2018 found that the number one reason that people thought about actually leaving their remote job, if ever, was loneliness
Mm-hmm.
and feeling socially isolated. So it's definitely a thing to be intentional about.
Mm. I think it's a good frame to the next question. So, how do you foster
Ah,
feedback and communication? Because some of
yeah,
this some of this would happen naturally if you and I were next to each other. Like you would see me,
yeah.
you could see how I was feeling and be like, "Hey, is everything okay? Or can I help?" Not as true in when everything's in Slack. So, what are some of maybe it's like workflows or meeting structures or
Yeah.
questions I should be asking that I should keep in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one of the most important pieces is when we think about communication, when we transfer it to working remotely, is the fact that we have to match the channel with the message, so to speak. So if something's really urgent, for example, right, versus something that's not really urgent, do we, when we're in person, communicate with sort of the same kind of thrust? No, we don't. And yet in remote, we kind of have sometimes a fire hose of all of that happening. And so
Mm-hmm.
instead, if you can create a system in your team where, okay, for things that are really urgent, it's going to be in Slack, or maybe it's going to be this sort of Slack message or channel, right? Or for things that are going to be more deeper discussions and thinking, then that's something that you'll want to put into Basecamp or Asana or
Mm-hmm.
Notion. And the expectation is you don't get back to us on it until, within 24 hours, right? And then maybe there's another form where if it's something that we need to brainstorm, it would be on Zoom, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
default is that it would be a 30-minute meet, whatever it is, right? You see, I'm getting a little sort of tactical here, but it's just to give examples that you don't just want to have messages that are going to everyone at all times in the same exact way. You want to be matching the message with the exact channel. So that's one thing. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I would say, if there's one sort of, everyone always wants the hack, so to speak, right? What is the magic? What is,
Yeah.
tell me the answer. What is if I can only do one thing, Claire, to invest in really making sure and supporting my remote team right now, what would that be? And if there was any one singular thing to point to, what the research really points to is to one-on-one meetings. And
Mm-hmm.
for those of you who've been, managing folks for a while, this comes to no surprise. Maybe for some of you who've been in some one-on-one meetings, you're thinking, but Claire, my one-on-one meetings are actually a complete waste of time, and I hate going to my one-on-one meetings. So you might be on that side of the spectrum too. Wherever you land, the reality is when they're actually done well, and there's so much research done on this, whether it's with Gallup looking at 1.2 million workers and seeing the correlation between one-on-one meetings and the frequency and performance, whether it's Google back in 2009, they actually did, it's a very famous study called Project Oxygen, where they saw the correlation between high-performing managers and one-on-one meetings. All to say, especially in a remote team, this is a huge lever to really support your remote employee, make sure that they're feeling good, and most importantly, uncover what concerns that they might have. So then of course the question is, well, then how do you actually do that well, right? And I
Well,
mean, and yeah, please.
I'll put the guide in the chat towards the end, but Claire's
Yeah.
company wrote a great guide about how to manage working remote, and it includes questions you can ask at your one-on-one. And one I really liked was when have you felt bored, right? Because
Mm,
it's a consequence of remote work that someone could be disengaged and you not know
exactly.
or not be aware. I love that question. Is there anything else that kind of helps surface those remote, unique insights?
Absolutely. I mean, two that I really like. One is just to straight up ask, what have you noticed about your remote working environment or conditions that have enabled you to do great work or actually been sort of blockers to you? So for example, do you feel like we are having too many meetings? Do you feel like you're getting too many Slack DMs? Do you feel like you actually want to be included on more social interaction or more meetings? Just, what's in your environment that I can help sort of shape, right, from a remote perspective? And then the second question that I often like to ask is, when have you been annoyed or bothered by something in the past 2 weeks? And this is really interesting because usually when we are trying to uncover issues or concerns that people have, you'll notice people are reluctant naturally. It's a human instinct to not want to create conflict. And so if you ask, oh, what should we improve? Or tell me how I can help you as a manager, tell me what I can be doing better, you might not get very fruitful responses. But if you ask, can you tell me when you were last maybe bothered or annoyed or peeved with something? It's fascinating. People will say, oh yeah, there's something. And it'll seem kind of small and then it'll sort of snowball and you'll realize, oh, yeah, me sort of pinging this person with a bunch of things off the top of my head and saying, oh, never mind, actually, we're not going to do that. Yeah, I could see how that would be annoying. You're going to gain so many insights off that question.
You referenced in one of your posts, and excuse me for not remembering, but it was about the CEO of Zapier, which is fully remote.
Yeah,
and he
Wade
said that
Foster.
Wade, and he was, one of his questions is to like DM people and go, hey, did I overstep? Like after giving feedback
Yes.
or inserting himself into a situation, just double checking that the person wasn't incredibly annoyed and giving them the permission to
Exactly.
be like, actually, yes, I prefer if you would have, waited or not.
Absolutely. I think Wade's brilliant, and I interviewed him on our podcast. So definitely, if you want sort of a really incredible insight into how he's managed this 200 plus person remote team, it's a great place to look. But the other thing that I really appreciated that was coupled with that too, Sean, was he talked about how it is so easy to misread the tone also in written communication. So that's the trade-off in fidelity, right? So you have sort of more focus, but then, oh gosh, is that person being sarcastic or are they just mad at me? And so him following up and saying, hey, was I off here? Did I overstep?
Yeah.
Or what he will do, or sometimes I will do, say, just so you know, right? This is how I meant to come off. Or that was sarcastic. Like people, there are some folks in a team who tend to be a little bit more sarcastic than others. And sometimes it's hard to tell, how it comes off in writing.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's, before we get to actually question 3, a question we got from an attendee, Billy. Is it gross to be selling in the current environment when everyone's remote and getting set up at home? So his exact question was, is it gross to be selling hard in the current environment, even though I offer like conference and call center products? So the idea of, are people open to outside inquiries about how to work better when they're still like getting their own house in order?
Totally. Yeah, it's these are definitely sensitive times for sure, in the sense that and we were talking about this really briefly, Sean, before the call of there are so many people right now who are really struggling, and the degree to which you want to impose on people who have a lot going on in their lives is, you obviously don't want to do that. And so I think one metric to think, or maybe not even a metric, but kind of a yardstick to think about is, and this was given to me by a wonderful mentor of mine who I kind of consider the best person I know at sales. And he said that essentially when you are selling well and you're doing it well, and not in like the car salesman kind of way, but you're actually doing a really good job selling, what you are doing is you are simply giving people information to then make the decision on their own. But I think about that a lot, especially in these times, is that if you feel like you actually do have information and you have something that actually could be really useful to people during these times, amidst all this craziness, then as long as all you are doing is sharing that information in a way that is respectful, non-intrusive, and not taking advantage of people's privacy or their desires for privacy, then you are giving information for those people to make decisions on their own. So that's sort of one framework I use around that.
Yeah, I mean, know your team's a perfect example of this. You know, everyone working remote has probably increased the potential customers for know your team. Do you find
Totally.
yourself balancing that? Like, this is
Oh, it
in
feels
some
super
ways,
weird.
yeah, in some ways, this is increasing my potential customer base. And the other way, it's at the result of this terrible thing happening.
Totally. I feel super weird about it. We're absolutely benefiting from the situation in the sense that there are more people who are remote and need tools, and managers who need tools. And so that's why I think really hard about, are we doing in a way that is really with other people's best interest in mind, if this actually could be useful, and erring on the side of trying to be useful and trying to help rather than just take advantage transactionally, because people can see through that. And so, for example, one of the things that we did is, and I think you might have shared in the chat, Sean, that we have a guide to managing remote teams. And that is actually something I researched. It took me almost a year to research. It took me 5 months to write. There's over 50 pages, 11
Incredibly
chapters.
comprehensive. I really recommend you check it out if you're watching this.
Thank you. But and I wrote it last year before all of this stuff happened, and it's a part of our product. Like, it's actually something that people buy Know Your Team in order to purchase. And we decided when all of this happened, we're just going to give away for free. So we just made it completely public. I run these online webinars, also called Know Your Team Workshop Live sessions, on a specific leadership topic. And again, you have to pay to purchase Know Your Team in order usually to access them. And I decided, well, for the one on managing remote teams, we're just going to make it completely for free, right? And some people could say, oh, well, Claire, that's just great lead generation. You're doing such a great job. But we're not. I mean, you could argue that. And then also, I mean, we didn't, spam people, and we're not farming anyone's email addresses or anything. I mean, even for the guide, for example, we collected email addresses in the beginning because we couldn't figure out the best way to distribute the guide very quickly. And then after we had a few weeks, we were like, oh, okay, this is how we can do it. But we didn't even collect email addresses for the guide for the most part. For the most time it was live. But I think I always just come back to that advice from my friend and mentor of just, all right, is it information that's useful, and letting other people decide whether or not they want to purchase in that sense.
Billy, thanks for the question. Again, in the chat, I'll surface the best ones to Claire. Question 3. So this goes on the poll question earlier. How do I build a social connection with a remote team so we can't all get drinks after work together in person? We can't do any retreats on or offsites.
Right.
We're all just flat little talking boxes on a screen. So how do we navigate this?
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. If you Google, social connection in a remote team, you're going to get hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas for games, happy hours, playing video games with people online, all that stuff. Those are all useful, but I think the most important thing to consider when we think about building social connection in a remote team is why. Like, why do we even want social connection? And so when you ask the bigger question of why, you sort of start at first principles of what function does social connection actually serve. Ton of research that's been done around how the underlying function of social connection is something called affective trust. And it's one type of trust that we really rely on as a team to be effective. And affective trust, what it is, it's essentially what researchers have determined as the kind of trust that is based off the feeling you have about someone that's like positive, right? Like, oh, Claire likes Spindrift, and Sean likes drinking Coke, and play drums when he was little, and I can relate to that, whatever, right? That's rapport. That's the affective trust piece. And it's enormously important in a remote team because you don't get that as much. Now, there's a second part, though, of trust that we often forget about, which is it's something called cognitive trust. And this is the kind of trust where it comes from our belief in someone's reliability and dependability. So I trust you, Sean, because, and this is in fact true, I spoke at 99U back when you were running it, and got to see you be extremely capable in running that, right? So I trust you because of not you drinking Coke or playing drums or whatever, but because of what you were actually able to do. So it's capability and competence, and then warmth and rapport, right? These two pieces of trust, affective and cognitive. So all this to say, and I just kind of lay out the underlying theory here really quickly to say that when we think about social connection, it's not just how many virtual happy hours can we do, how many cooking sessions can we do with the entire team. It's actually, well, are we being intentional about actually building affective trust? So helping people find unlikely connections with one another and find that rapport, but also cognitive trust, which means, am I following through on what I promised to the team? And am I being vulnerable and admitting my mistakes? Am I explaining why we're doing certain things in a team? And you have to be able to do both. So I always provide sort of that framing when we think about social connection, because what it's really about is trust. And it's more than just the social events around trust that we want to invest in.
That's an excellent observation, because one thing that was jarring to me at first, going from not remote to remote, is if we meet in person in an office and we sit down in the room, we'll get started, right? Like we have a limited amount of time, like we can socialize later. When it's remote, there actually is no other time to socialize. So I found that the first 5 minutes of every meeting has to be social, because otherwise you have no context for the person you're talking to. There's no like walk in the hallway together or like, how was your weekend? It has to happen in the meeting itself.
You nailed it, Sean, because what that is, that's actually affective trust, right?
Right.
And because you're so focused on the cognitive trust most of the time, right? The affective trust, like we completely forget. And so there's a lot of research that's shown about how you actually need affective trust, especially in the beginning of relationships, which is why when you start a meeting, taking and investing, and this is, just to bring this very practically, instead of spending 5 minutes talking about, hey, how was your weekend? Spend 20. Right? Spend a little bit more time investing in social connection instead of just relying on the monthly happy hour, right? Video call when everyone already has been on way too many Zoom calls or whatnot, right? Think about, do we have a dedicated non-work channel for people to chat with? Do we have some sort of buddy system where people can get together on their own time, virtually and connect? How good is our onboarding system for thinking about social connection and building this type of rapport? And then obviously, using something like Know Your Team, right? We have social questions and icebreakers for this exact reason.
And if you're an introvert or an extrovert, right? If you're an extrovert, you get your energy from that and your work energy, which brings us to our final question. How can I best manage my focus or energy? So to all you guys attending, if you filled out the form to register for this, I asked, do you have any questions for Claire? And over again, I saw some version of, now I got to monitor a Slack, a Basecamp, a Zoom, my email. I'm being overwhelmed. I can't focus. And by the way, I have to homeschool my kids while I'm doing this. So that kind of energy and focus is frayed. So I'd love to know some things, you do or you recommend. One example I got reading some of your writing was the company-wide doc of how we work, right? Like these are focus times, these are not focus times, setting boundaries. I would love for any example like that, how the individual or the company can stay focused.
Absolutely. So on a company level, I think the most important thing to realize is that people and your team's energy and focus is finite, meaning that you don't just add on work and add on goals and KPIs and all of a sudden they just continue to get hit. It's this idea of a trade-off that is finite energy. And so because of that, thinking really deeply as leaders of, well, what am I actually saying in a team that is most important to get done? That is where it starts. We as leaders so easily confuse what is sort of the team's highest use. And so we feel depleted. Our team feels depleted because we are doing way too many things that are not actually truly critical to the task and to the vision at hand. So that's where it starts, is getting super clear on what's most important and understanding that energy and focus is finite in your team. The second thing, and you alluded to this, Sean, is, gosh, are we carving out time to give people to actually be focused? That's the other thing. You can't get work done when you're in a meeting, right? You can't get work done when you're responding to the million Slack DMs that people, every single team member saying, hey, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? So thinking about, and, very practical ways that companies have done this is, they take a whole day. One of our clients just recently implemented this actually, and Wednesdays are no meeting days, just no meetings allowed. They're like illegal in the company, right? And you can do your own version of that, right? But the premise is creating, actually ensuring that the work structure matches the intent that you have for the way you want people to actually work. So that's sort of and you mentioned the write-ups, right? So being really clear and documenting, well, how do you match the message to the channel? How are we actually thinking about being asynchronous? All of that, codifying that in a document. Again, the remote guide goes super in depth to this. I have a ton of examples, but high level, those are some good practices on an org level. As an individual, it's interesting. I think the sort of gnawing, restless, tired feeling, right? Fatigue that we feel from doing way too many things is honestly, first of all, the result of just doing way too many things. So kind of similarly on an organizational level, we have to personally reflect, well, what is actually most important? Am I saying I need to get all of these things done just because I said I should be, or what is truly critical here? So that's one piece. I think after you do that, you might actually even be a little more overwhelmed because you realize, actually, I do have to get all those things. I've been in that place, and that's completely understandable. So then the next question to ask is, well, if you cannot reduce your scope of what you have to get done and your energy and your focus is finite, then what are the ways in which you can actually restore that energy and focus? And one of the best ways is, yes, you can try to carve out some time, for yourself every day. Maybe that's 10 minutes, maybe it's 5, whatever it is, right? And there's sort of a lot of advice that's around that. But another thing to do, another thing to do is to actually try to reconnect with the thing that most energizes you about the work in the first place. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things I'll oftentimes ask leaders and individual contributors to reflect on is, when you first took this job, right? When you said yes and signed your letter of intent or whatever it is, right? You likely felt pretty excited and jazzed about what you're doing. Okay, why? Like, what was it? What was the hope? And now you might feel a little bit more jaded, or you're just too overwhelmed, right? Yeah. But there was something, right? And maybe it's changed. But I think and this is something I try to do a lot. I'm the CEO of a company, and God, it's hard. This stuff, it's hard. Yeah. I get tired. And what helps me recharge is, yes, taking time for myself. Yes, making sure I'm not working, making sure I'm getting away. Yes. And also trying to reconnect with, well, what did energize me? What does make this role, this job fun?
I've noticed a lot of managers I've had, they maybe do like 5 or 10% of their time carving out stuff where if you approach them like, hey, isn't this not the best use of your time? And they'd be like, I don't care. I really love doing this and it's fun. So, but like, it could be writing, like you mentioned your level of like writing, blog posts and sharing that.
Exactly.
Exactly. Some managers will hop on a sales call every now and then just to show the kids they still got it, things like that.
Totally. So whatever that is that, you just have really, that you loved originally, to sort of fall in love with that part of your job again.
Okay, that's the 4 questions. I would love for any questions you have in the chat. I had one pre-submitted, which was, how do I know when I'm checking in and it's helpful, and when am I just being annoying, right? So I can't look and see your progress, but I do need to know the progress. How do I balance that as a leader and as a manager?
Yeah. So in some ways, those are 2 different questions, I would say, to the person who asked. And I mean that, in a totally fine way, in the sense that the first question of how do I know if the way that I'm checking in is annoying or not, the best answer to that, and this is going to seem super, I don't mean to sound pedantic at all, but is literally just to ask, right? We forget to do this as a manager. We forget to ask, hey, so I've noticed that I've found myself checking in, once every day around 10 o'clock via Slack. Be real with me. Like, should I be doing that less? Like, here's what I was thinking. Maybe I could do that just, on Fridays or something, or right. Make it a conversation, suggest other alternatives, admit that I think that could be annoying. Is that annoying? I think it might be annoying. Right. So ask, right. And then there's a second question though, which is, well, the reason, right? Getting to the underlying reason of why that might be even occurring in the first place. The reason is, well, I don't actually really know what they're working on and they haven't shared it with me. So what do I do?
Yeah.
Right? So in that case, really thinking about, well, what is the system in which I'm creating a way to get automatic status updates is key. A lot of different ways to do this. Sort of the best practice. It's something we do internally here at Know Your Team. It's what all our customers do. It's what a lot of different leaders do, is they use some sort of tool, right, that asks folks every day, hey, what did you work on yesterday? What are you going to work on today? And then that gets shared with everyone. So not just the manager, but everyone. So that way everyone knows, what they're working on. And the whole idea is you spend 30 seconds writing it. So it's not like you are trying to perform that you're doing your work, if that makes any sense. So, you spend 30 seconds just writing what you worked on, writing what you plan to work on, and then it automatically gets shared through email or through Slack. In Know Your Team, we have a feature for this. It's called the heartbeat check-in. You could also do this, honestly, manually if you really wanted to, right? Like you don't have to necessarily use a tool for it. But the whole idea is whatever you decide to do, finding a way to automate getting that status update so you do know. And so when you are checking in with someone, it's not about, hey, what are you working on? It's, hey, I read your progress update.
What are we all working on? Yeah.
Yeah, I read your progress updates and I have some ideas about this, right? And I'm thinking that maybe we should try this.
Yeah, I guess part of the update thing is that it's expected, right? I know every morning rather than when I see the DM in Slack and the person asking me what I'm working on, it almost feels accusatory, even if it's not.
Oh my God, you get like the heart sort of like jumps out a little bit, or you get like a little sweaty and you're just like, oh God, did I do something wrong? Did I drop the ball? And you as the manager, you're just like, no, I just want to know. I'm just curious, right?
Right. Yeah, you're just like firing off a DM.
Exactly. And so we have to think about a little more consciously, how are we creating that system so it's more proactive, that people are sharing that info with us.
Well, so questions from the crew. That's my questions. I just have one last thing before we go. We're all inside. We're all home more than we normally are. I want to know your content rec. So is there a Netflix show you're enjoying? Is there a book you're tearing through right now? Is there a Britney Spears album you're particularly enjoying at the moment?
No, I'm going to regret that. The fact that this is is just blackmail material for me. It's interesting. I've been actually trying to consume less during this time, if that makes any sense, and be just a little bit more reflective and generative during this time. So the thing that I've actually been doing, and this isn't a recommendation by any means, is the way I've been spending a lot of my time is I'm doing a lot of painting. So that's been sort of my thing is, and that's the thing that I found really beautiful, actually, this weird silver lining to everything in quarantine is I do a lot of oil painting and have in the past, but now I'm like, oh, I get this time to really make something and be a little bit more generative. So I hope for other folks, if that strikes a chord, that it's a nice thing to come back to.
Cool. Claire, thank you so much for taking the time with Crossbeam Happy Hour. If you guys want to learn more about Claire's work, knowyourteam.com. Awesome blog posts, guides, podcasts. It's really kind of an embarrassment of riches, and it's crazy. Most of it's free. So please consume. Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sean.